something I realized over the past year, and this sounds odd, but it was that I am actually a poet. Right at the outset, we were in one of our first meetings with all the National Student Poets, and I remember Olivia saying that all of you right now have imposter syndrome. And while we can't do anything about that, we can just assure you that you are deserving and you will continue to prove it throughout the year. She was definitely right. I did have a lot of imposter syndrome, and I definitely didn't think I deserved it at the time. But over the year, my understanding of what it meant to deserve it changed entirely, and I think I transferred that into a responsibility. When you think of community service, when you think of poetry, you think teaching poetry, you think reading poetry, you think introducing poetry to people. But the specific medium through which I thought would be best suited for the times would be online, because this year, for relatively obvious reasons, we couldn't really travel as much. I couldn't go to the libraries that I wanted to talk to kids. I couldn't do a lot of the in-school events that I originally had planned to. But instead, I decided, well, if there is some online resource, it would alleviate those issues and at the same time be more accessible to a wider range of students who I might not be able to geographically reach.
If you get anyone into writing, I think a really good way to interest them into the writing is to start off with poetry, is to get them into writing their own poetry, because the forms are really not limiting. You can do almost anything on a piece of paper with words, and then you can call it poetry.
The details of my project mostly involve some sort of free-floating online resource where I can compile poetry resources, poems I think would be valuable for students to read, and any advice I've gathered to help aid any young poets. The way this project reflects in my own past is that the only reason I ever got into poetry was because I had a good English teacher who introduced me to it.
The reason I think that I actually started writing poetry was because of the Scholastic program to begin with, because my teacher wanted me to submit something, and then we had like a poetry assignment in class. So then I started writing poetry on my own, and that just kind of spirals.
There has to be something else for the other people who don't have the same luck I did, and so I'm trying to create that something else. In things like poetry, in things like inclusivity, these things link together really well, which is part of the reason why poetry has been such an expansive way for people to express social justice messages.
A lot of poets that I know end up being in some way involved with political activism.
These same communities that encourage poetry encourage people to grow, to learn, and to be accepting at first and then absorb people into the community. If poetry is writing about something that one cares about, I mean, there's not really much of a better way to do it than find activism for it, and then that fuels your writing, or your writing fuels your activism.